Speak through these words if they're worthy, Lord. If they are not, then speak in spite of them. Amen. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. Do not judge, do not condemn. Give, forgive. I'm willing to bet that for many people, I know certainly for me, the hardest of these four directives is forgive. Forgiveness is not simple, although people make it sound like it should be. Forgiveness is not easy. Depending on what has happened, real forgiveness is not fun, and it is not quick. And yet, it's the best thing for us. Jesus says so. I think it's true that true forgiveness is a step on the path to true life. But it's difficult, and it's slow, and it's messy, and we have to do it. Not just because Jesus says so, but because carrying resentment, holding a grudge, not forgiving, that only makes the damage done even worse. And yet, not forgiving doesn't make things worse for the person who harmed us, which I think we think it might or should. It makes it worse for ourselves. It makes it worse for us in our relationships with God and with other people. I bring into my relationships with God and with people, with all of you, the resented hurts that I still would carry with me. Living out resentment feels to many of us, often, like a God-given right. But living out resentment is not living into our God-made abundant lives. It is best to let go. I also am certain that we've been given some bad information from our culture, even from our faith, about what forgiveness might really be. And since it's best to let go, maybe let's let go of some of the wrong ideas we have about what forgiveness might be. Forgiveness is not pretending nothing happened. Something happened, and it hurt. Forgiveness isn't pretending that it doesn't matter. It does. You do. Forgiveness is also not allowing the harm to continue. Forgiveness is not based on the quality of the apology of the offender. I don't like this one, which means it's probably true. Forgiveness is not based on the severity of the injury. Forgiveness is not reconciliation. We can talk about other ideas we may have had that we could let go of about what forgiveness is not. So, Ed, what's the best definition then you've ever heard of forgiveness? Well, I'm glad you asked. First, I confess to you that my best definition that I ever heard from someone else did not come from a noted Anglican theological scholar. I did not get this from the Reverend Matt, although his is good. No, the best definition I've ever heard of forgiveness, I heard out of the mouth of a colleague when I worked at a psychiatric hospital in Memphis. That's what we called them then. So dig, if you will, the picture. We're in the break room of the adult services building, and we're eating lunch, and there were 3 of us. Now, these were my pre-master's degree social work days. I fulfilled a role at the hospital called psychiatric technician, which some saw as the glorified renaming of a hospital orderly. And the 2 other people were counselors from the addictions wing of our building. And they were having a lively conversation about philosophical and spiritual matters. And at some point, in what seems to me now as if it were a great theatrical buildup to a plot-changing line in a play, one of them, Randy, his real name, asked the other, Jamie, her real name, then how do you define forgiveness? And Jamie's response was clearly unrehearsed. It seemed to have never before been uttered. Yet it was beautifully well thought out. It was as if all of her life had led up to this moment for her to make clear to herself and to someone else what forgiveness is. Jamie replied, forgiveness is when something or someone no longer has power over you. There was no mention of a God. There was no mention of reconciliation. Forgiveness is when something or someone no longer has power over you. Now, of all the times I have discussed forgiveness and heard forgiveness discussed, that one rises to the top because here we are 30 years later and I'm preaching on it. It rises to the top of all of them for me. It eschews theological loftiness for very human practicality. It is a very utilitarian approach for forgiving others. Pleased to remind us that it's a very utilitarian approach for forgiving ourselves. Forgiveness is when something or someone no longer has power over you. Now, as I said, the theology isn't obvious in that statement. But then again, God often infiltrates our lives in many ways. And in those ways, God is able to show us a more excellent way while God remains anonymous. God is with us in forgiveness, both in the giving of it and in the receiving of it. But God is not a glory hound. To have life abundantly, you and I have to let go of things that have hurt us so that they cease to have power over us, or the burden of them will become unbearable. Remember that that which we hold on to actually holds us prisoner. Jesus makes it clear that we have to do this, forgive. But he doesn't tell us how. He doesn't tell us that it's slow. He doesn't tell us that it's hard, that it's messy. He does not tell us, and I think our culture has tried to teach us this, he does not tell us that forgiveness is an act. It is not a feeling. Don't get me wrong, forgiveness can feel great. I have felt much better being forgiven of something that I have done as a misdeed, and I have felt lighter at times when I was able to let go of a hurt that I was carrying. I'm not saying forgiveness doesn't have a feeling component, but it is never that quick. It is never that simple. Hurt and pain and resentment can linger long. Now, from a very human standpoint, it's fair to say also, resentment to many of us tastes sweet. But so does antifreeze. Antifreeze and resentment are deadly, period. Spiritually and emotionally, it is light years better to clean the slate than to slurp on the sickly sweet resentment. It does require patience. It shouldn't. That's not fair, but it does require patience. The clean slate is always better, but it does not always wipe squeaky clean at first. And more often than not, depending on the situation, we cannot usually do the work alone. And the person who harmed us is almost never the best person to help us. Depending on the situation, we do well to not try forgiveness through a reconciling conversation directly with someone who has harmed us. Of all of those that I've sat and witnessed as a priest and as a social worker, they rarely go as the wounded person might have hoped. Forgiveness is the spiritual work. It is the life work of the person who was harmed. The other person's apology does not factor in our forgiveness. Forgiveness is not found in an effort to elicit our offender's confession. Love keeps no record of wrongdoings, not because they don't matter. Love keeps no record of wrongdoings because abundant life and love cannot coexist with resentment. Forgiveness is not fun, not even a little bit. And it is highly unjust that the work of the forgiveness falls to the person who was harmed. I think the offender should have to do all of that heavy lifting, but it doesn't work that way. I wish it did. The offender has given us an injury that they cannot help heal, but resentment is something we give ourselves over and over and over. It's as if you've resent an email. It keeps coming back, but the person pressing send is ourselves. Long after the offender is out of our lives, resentments can linger in the spirit of our acrimony. It's not simple. Forgiveness isn't easy. It isn't fun. It is not quick. Forgiveness is putting down a burden that we no longer can carry, and it's the best thing for us. Jesus says so. Don't judge, you won't be judged. Don't condemn, you won't be condemned. Give and it will be given to you. Forgive and you will know forgiveness. Jesus says so. Amen.